The day started like any other, quiet and unremarkable. The soft hum of morning traffic outside and the familiar smell of coffee brewing in the kitchen. But for the main character, everything was about to change in a way no one could have predicted. A letter had arrived just days ago, the kind that seemed ordinary at first glance. It was thick, with a formal envelope and an official-looking seal, yet the weight of it hinted at something more significant. Curiosity had drawn them to open it immediately, expecting perhaps a bill or a routine notice. Instead, what lay inside was a revelation that turned their life upside down. They had inherited a home, a property they had never seen, in a neighborhood that was anything but ordinary. The words on the page felt surreal. A distant relative, someone whose presence in their life had been limited to occasional holiday greetings and polite exchanges, had left them a house. Not a modest dwelling, but a spacious, well-kept home in a community known for its careful maintenance, strict rules, and meticulous order. The letter explained the process, the legal steps needed, and the responsibilities that came with the property. At first, disbelief was the only emotion that registered. How could this happen? Why them? And what did it all really mean? The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of calls to lawyers, meetings with estate representatives, and endless paperwork. Each step brought the reality closer, confirming that the inheritance was not just a dream or a mistake. The house was theirs, in every legal sense. But with ownership came obligations. And some of those obligations were dictated by an organization that few dared to challenge, the Homeowners Association. At first, the HOA seemed benign, almost welcoming, sending a letter congratulating them on joining the community. It was polite, formal, and completely unassuming. But beneath the surface, there was an undercurrent of control that would soon become apparent. When they first arrived at the neighborhood, the impression was striking. The streets were clean, lined with perfectly trimmed trees and manicured lawns. Houses stood like well-placed pieces of art, each one reflecting a standard of care that suggested pride and careful oversight. There was a sense of calm, almost a reassuring feeling of order. Yet, there was also something else, a subtle watchfulness. Neighbors passed by with polite smiles, nods that were friendly on the surface, but carried an undertone of scrutiny. Every car, every visitor, every minor detail seemed noticed. It was as though the community itself had eyes and a memory, recording every movement and every choice. Settling into the house was both exciting and intimidating. The main character spent days exploring each room, marveling at the space and the light that poured through large windows. They found the garden inviting, the backyard promising quiet afternoons, and the interior filled with charm and character. It was everything one could hope for in a home, and yet an invisible pressure lingered. Every letter from the HOA, every notice about maintenance or regulations, served as a reminder that freedom in this community came with strings attached at first. The rules seemed minor, almost trivial. There were restrictions on paint colors, guidelines for lawn care, and instructions for where certain types of trash could be placed. It was not unusual for new homeowners to feel a slight sense of frustration, but the main character approached each rule with care, eager to integrate into the community and avoid conflict. However, it did not take long for the first hint of tension to appear. The HOA was strict, but more importantly, they were selective. Some residents seemed to pass without notice, while the slightest deviation from rules brought official letters, reminders, and sometimes even warnings. The main character began to sense that there was more to the organization than met the eye. The first encounter with the HOA's power came unexpectedly. A letter arrived one morning, crisp and precise, stating that a small garden decoration did not comply with community guidelines. The wording was firm, almost accusatory, and the tone suggested that failure to correct the issue could lead to penalties. Confused and slightly frustrated, the main character called the HOA office for clarification. The response was polite, but distant, with instructions to fix the problem immediately, and a reminder that all residents were expected to adhere to the rules without exception. There was no room for discussion, no explanation of why some neighbors seemed to be exempt from similar restrictions. It was a subtle but clear message. Compliance was not optional. Despite the initial unease, the main character tried to adapt. Days were spent making small adjustments, checking and rechecking every detail to ensure there would be no more notices. The community, for all its charm and beauty, demanded vigilance. Every fence, every hedge, every minor improvement became a potential point of scrutiny. Friends visiting the home commented on the level of perfection around them, and while it was impressive, it also felt stifling. There was a quiet tension beneath the polished surface, a sense that the community was as much about control as it was about aesthetics. As time passed, interactions with neighbors revealed a pattern. Casual conversations often drifted to comments about the HOA, subtle warnings disguised as friendly advice. Stories emerged of residents who had faced fines for minor infractions, who had argued with board members only to find themselves drawn into disputes that consumed time, energy, and even money. The main character began to realize that the inheritance was not just a gift of property, but an entry into a system that could be both welcoming and punishing. The balance of power was delicate. One misstep could have consequences far beyond what seemed reasonable. Evenings were spent reflecting on the sudden shift in life circumstances. The inheritance brought excitement, yes, but it also brought responsibility and awareness. The main character thought about the distant relative who had left the house, wondering if they had any idea of the strict rules that governed it. The beauty of the neighborhood came with hidden challenges, challenges that required patience, observation, and strategic thinking. There was a quiet determination forming, a sense that while the rules existed, they could be understood, navigated, and perhaps even challenged if the need arose at the same time. There were moments of joy and appreciation. The home was theirs, a space to build memories, to cultivate a life that was uniquely theirs. The garden, once a source of a letter from the HOA, became a place of reflection, where the main character could think, plan, and simply enjoy the quiet of the neighborhood. Sunsets in the backyard painted the sky with colors that felt like a reward for enduring the complexities of the community. Each morning brought a new opportunity to explore, to understand the rhythm of the neighborhood, and to prepare for the challenges that lay ahead. The first month in the home passed in a mixture of excitement, curiosity, and cautious awareness. The main character learned the names of neighbors, attended a few community meetings, and slowly began to understand the unwritten rules that guided life in the neighborhood. There was an art to navigating the HOA's expectations. While some of it felt restrictive, there was also a sense of belonging that could be cultivated. It was a delicate dance, one that required attention, patience, and a willingness to observe before acting. One day, while walking through the neighborhood, the main character overheard a conversation between two longtime residents. They spoke quietly, almost conspiratorially, about fines, disputes, and power struggles within the HOA. The words were revealing, hinting at conflicts that were rarely visible to outsiders. It became clear that the community was not as harmonious as it appeared, that beneath the manicured lawns and friendly smiles, there were tensions, grievances, and a complex web of authority. The inheritance, once a simple gift of property, had become a doorway into a deeper understanding of human behavior, power, and the ways communities can both support and restrict their members. The main character returned home that evening with a mixture of emotions. Gratitude for the inheritance, yes, but also a sense of challenge. This was more than a house. It was a test of patience, resilience, and intelligence. Each interaction with the HOA, each observation of neighbors, each small notice or letter was a clue in understanding the broader system. It was not enough to follow the rules blindly. One had to understand them, anticipate them, and navigate them strategically. There was a quiet determination building. A feeling that the inheritance could be more than just a home, it could be a stage on which to assert fairness, reason, and dignity. Late at night, as the neighborhood slept under the soft glow of streetlights, the main character sat by the window, reflecting on the journey so far. The inheritance had changed everything, not in dramatic, immediate ways, but in the subtle, persistent ways that touch every part of life. The house was beautiful, the community was ordered, but there was a lesson hidden beneath the surface. Appearances could be deceiving, and control often came disguised as care. Understanding this would be the first step in a journey that promised both challenges and victories. The first part of this story closes not with conflict resolved, but with awareness awakened. The main character had stepped into a world that was at once inviting and demanding. The inheritance was a gift, but it was also a responsibility, a puzzle that required observation, courage, and careful action. Life in the neighborhood had begun, and with it, the stage was set for the trials and triumphs that lay ahead. Each day promised new discoveries. Each letter and interaction held lessons. And the quiet determination of the main character was the first spark of the journey from inheritance to eventual victory. The first signs of trouble came quietly, almost like a whisper that something was off in the carefully ordered neighborhood. The main character had been living in the inherited house for a few weeks now, learning the rhythms of the community and the habits of its residents. The letters from the HOA had slowed after the initial garden decoration incident, giving a false sense of relief. But life in the neighborhood was never that simple. One morning, a crisp envelope appeared in the mailbox, stamped with the HOA's official seal. As they opened it, a sense of unease settled in. This time, the notice was about a minor issue, a slight discrepancy in the alignment of the driveway edging. It seemed small, almost trivial, yet the language of the letter was stern, leaving no room for discussion. A fine could be imposed if it was not corrected immediately. The main character stared at the letter, a mix of frustration and disbelief growing. How could such a minor detail warrant formal action? Nevertheless, they acted quickly, following the instructions to adjust the edging. Hours were spent measuring, realigning, and double-checking, ensuring that nothing would give the HOA a reason to send another warning. It was exhausting and unnecessary, but the character wanted to start on the right foot. They hoped that this compliance would ease tensions and signal that they were willing to follow the community's rules. Despite these efforts, tensions began to rise as patterns emerged. The HOA seemed to target new residents, enforcing rules with precision and sometimes punishing trivial infractions. Conversations with neighbors revealed similar experiences, fines for minor mistakes, letters threatening penalties for small, almost invisible violations, and an unspoken expectation of total compliance. It became clear that the association's influence extended far beyond maintaining appearances. It was about control, authority, and the ability to dictate daily life. A few days later, another notice arrived. This one concerned the color of window shutters. The HOA had recently passed a guideline requiring certain shades. The main character's choices did not match the approved palette. Frustration turned into concern. Following the rules to the letter still seemed to invite scrutiny, as though the HOA was testing them. A phone call to the office yielded polite, distant instructions: correct the issue immediately. There was no room for compromise, no acknowledgement of the work already done around the property. It was clear that compliance alone would not guarantee peace. The main character began to pay closer attention to the neighborhood, observing how others navigated the rules. Some residents moved cautiously, meticulously following every guideline, while others seemed to exist under a protective shield of familiarity, their minor infractions overlooked. It became evident that knowing the system and the right people could make a difference. The main character realized that understanding the HOA's internal workings was as important as following the rules themselves. The community was a delicate balance of appearances and power, and small mistakes could have large consequences. Determined to take control of the situation, the main character started keeping detailed records of every notice received, every conversation with HOA officials, and every adjustment made to the property. This practice helped them see patterns and inconsistencies. They noticed that some board members seemed to apply the rules selectively, issuing fines for certain residents while ignoring similar situations elsewhere. The realization was uncomfortable. The HOA was not just an administrative body, but a group that wielded authority in ways that could feel arbitrary and personal. In addition to the official notices, whispers and rumors began circulating. Neighbors, once friendly and chatty, hinted at disputes that had gone unresolved for years, fines that seemed unfair, and meetings that ended in frustration. The main character listened carefully, piecing together a broader picture of the neighborhood's dynamics. Each story added clarity, showing that the association's power extended beyond rules and regulations into influence over social interactions, community standing, and even property values. It became clear that navigating the HOA required both careful attention to detail and an understanding of human behavior. The first direct confrontation came during a community meeting. The main character attended, hoping to introduce themselves and learn more about the neighborhood. What began as a routine gathering quickly became a test of authority. A board member questioned a minor detail about the property, framing it as a serious violation despite the main character's careful compliance. The exchange was polite but tense. Other residents watched silently, some nodding in agreement with the board, others casting sympathetic glances. It was a subtle reminder that the HOA's influence was immediate and public, capable of shaping perceptions and creating pressure even without formal penalties. After the meeting, the main character reflected on the situation. It was no longer enough to simply follow rules. They needed to understand the broader system and anticipate the ways in which authority could be exercised. Research became a daily task, reading community bylaws, studying past meeting minutes, and talking to residents willing to share their experiences. Slowly, a strategy began to form, one that balanced compliance with preparedness. The main character realized that standing passively in the face of arbitrary enforcement would not lead to peace. Knowledge and careful action were necessary at home. Evenings were spent documenting interactions, noting inconsistencies, and preparing for future encounters with the board. The house, once a sanctuary of comfort and excitement, became a place of both planning and reflection. Despite the challenges, there was a quiet satisfaction in understanding the dynamics at play. Each letter, each notice, each minor dispute was a clue in a larger puzzle. And solving that puzzle required patience, intelligence, and resolve. Neighbors gradually became more open, sharing stories of their own struggles and victories within the community. Some had quietly challenged unfair fines and won, while others had learned to avoid attention, living cautiously to maintain peace. The main character absorbed these lessons, realizing that the path forward would require both strategic thinking and careful diplomacy. Friendships and alliances built on trust and shared experiences became an important part of navigating the community. One day, the HOA issued a notice that felt like a test of endurance. A minor outdoor improvement done with care and in good taste was flagged as a violation. The language was stern, implying possible penalties if it was not corrected. The main character followed the instructions, documenting every step meticulously, photographing changes, and keeping copies of correspondence. This process, while tedious, created a record that could be used if disputes escalated. It was a small victory in control and preparation, a demonstration that diligence and attention could counterbalance arbitrary authority. The experience also fostered a sense of empathy for other residents. The main character understood how easy it could be to feel powerless in the face of an organization that seemed indifferent to reason. They began to see that strength came from knowledge, persistence, and a willingness to act thoughtfully rather than react emotionally. Each interaction with the HOA reinforced this lesson, teaching that composure and careful strategy could diffuse conflict and maintain dignity. As weeks turned into months, the main character became more confident in navigating the neighborhood. They learned to anticipate potential issues, communicate clearly and calmly with board members, and document everything in case disputes arose. The community, while still imposing in its rules and scrutiny, became a place where the main character could operate with both awareness and agency. The lessons learned in these early conflicts were preparing them for greater challenges, instilling a resilience that would prove crucial in the battles to come. Through all this, the inherited house remained a source of pride and joy. Its beauty and comfort provided a refuge from the pressures of the HOA. Reminding the main character of why the inheritance mattered, it was more than a property. It was a home, a place to grow, and a symbol of the determination required to face challenges with grace and intelligence. Each morning brought renewed energy to navigate the community. Each evening offered reflection on lessons learned and strategies for the future. Part 2 closes with the main character standing at the threshold of understanding. aware of the subtle power dynamics at play and ready to engage with them thoughtfully. The early clashes with the HOA had revealed that rules alone did not define life in the neighborhood. Authority, perception, and strategic action shaped every interaction. The stage was set for further challenges, and the main character, armed with knowledge and careful observation, was prepared to face them. The journey from simple inheritance to confident mastery of the community had begun, and the road ahead promised both trials and triumphs. By the time the main character reached the third month in the neighborhood, a deeper understanding of the HOA's workings had taken root. What had started as minor frustrations had grown into a clear picture of selective enforcement and the subtle pressures used to maintain control. Each notice, each meeting, each conversation added layers to a system that was both complex and, at times, unfair. It was no longer just about paint colors or lawn edging. It was about influence, perception, and how authority could be wielded to intimidate or reward. One afternoon, another letter arrived, this one more formal than before. The HOA had flagged the placement of outdoor furniture in the backyard, claiming it violated spacing regulations. The main character stared at the words, feeling a mix of exasperation and resolve. The instructions were detailed, leaving little room for interpretation. While other residents might have reacted with frustration or resignation, the main character saw it as an opportunity to test the boundaries of the association's authority. They carefully documented everything, photographing the furniture, taking measurements, and drafting a polite but firm response that questioned the reasoning behind the notice while demonstrating compliance. It was a small act of resistance, an assertion of awareness that authority could be met with careful scrutiny. In the following days, the main character began paying closer attention to patterns in the HOA's actions. They noticed that certain board members seemed to wield influence disproportionately, their opinions carrying more weight in meetings and decision-making. Some residents received leniency, perhaps due to personal relationships or familiarity with the board, while newcomers were often scrutinized intensely. This realization sparked a strategy, understanding not only the written rules but also the human dynamics behind them. The community was not merely governed by regulations, but by a network of influence, observation, and sometimes favoritism, to gather more insight. The main character began attending meetings more regularly, observing how decisions were made, and listening carefully to the tone and language used by board members. These sessions were revealing. Subtle comments, pauses, and body language often conveyed more than the formal rules themselves. Residents who asked questions were sometimes met with dismissive answers, while others received detailed explanations. It became evident that knowledge, confidence, and timing were key to navigating the system effectively. The main character began taking notes, recording observations, and developing a personal approach that balanced assertiveness with diplomacy. Neighbor interactions grew more complex during this period. Casual conversations revealed hidden frustrations, past conflicts, and stories of fines that seemed disproportionate to minor infractions. Some residents spoke openly about the fear of standing up to the board, while others quietly shared strategies for minimizing disputes. The main character absorbed these lessons, realizing that community life was as much about social navigation as it was about following the rules. Trust, alliances, and awareness became vital tools in managing daily life under the HOA's oversight. One day, the main character received a notice that felt particularly challenging. A tree in the front yard, perfectly healthy and well-maintained, has been flagged as non-compliant due to height restrictions. It was a minor issue in reality, yet the language of the letter implied serious consequences if it was not addressed promptly. The main character took a measured approach. They researched the regulation, documented the tree's condition, and reached out to a landscape expert to provide an assessment. Armed with evidence, they drafted a formal response to the HOA, combining compliance with reasoned argument. It was a careful balance, showing willingness to cooperate. While highlighting inconsistencies in enforcement, this episode marked a turning point. The main character realized that preparation and knowledge could shift interactions from intimidation to negotiation. Each documented response, each well-considered action, diminished the arbitrary power of the HOA, turning potential conflict into an opportunity for clarity and fairness. The experience also reinforced the importance of patience and composure, demonstrating that calm, informed responses could influence outcomes more effectively than emotion or frustration as weeks went by. The main character's reputation in the community began to evolve. Board members started to recognize a resident who was both attentive and informed, a person who would follow rules carefully but also question unfair practices politely and effectively. Neighbors took notice as well, some offering quiet support, others seeking advice on how to handle their own challenges. The house, once a symbol of sudden inheritance, became a hub of understanding and cautious influence, reflecting not only ownership but also a growing mastery of the neighborhood's dynamics. During this period, the main character also started uncovering irregularities within the HOA itself. Financial records, meeting minutes, and historical correspondence revealed patterns of selective enforcement, discrepancies in fees collected, and instances where decisions appeared to benefit a few rather than the community at large. It was a subtle but powerful insight. The authority of the HOA was not absolute, and careful examination could reveal inconsistencies that might support challenges or requests for reform. The main character's approach was methodical, combining observation, research, and diplomacy to gather knowledge without creating unnecessary conflict. Interactions with board members continued to be delicate. Politeness and respect were essential, but so was clarity and documentation. Each letter, each phone call, and each meeting became an exercise in strategy. The main character learned to present facts, provide evidence, and frame responses in a way that acknowledged authority while maintaining personal rights. This approach minimized confrontation while creating a foundation for potential challenges in the future. It was an ongoing lesson in balance, patience, and strategic thinking. Community life outside of HOA interactions provided both relief and perspective. Casual gatherings, walks in the neighborhood, and friendly exchanges offered moments of connection and normalcy. These experiences reminded the main character that the community was more than its rules and fines, that human relationships and shared experiences could provide support and insight. Bonds formed quietly, creating networks of trust and information that were invaluable in navigating complex interactions with the board. The main character learned to listen, to observe, and to recognize patterns not only in official actions, but in everyday behavior. One particularly revealing moment came during a neighborhood event. A resident shared a story of a prolonged dispute over a minor property improvement, detailing how documentation and persistence ultimately resulted in a favorable resolution. The main character saw the power of preparation and strategic action in a tangible way, understanding that careful attention to detail, patience, and clear communication could transform potential conflict into resolution. It was a practical lesson in the importance of combining knowledge with tact and perseverance. The main character also began to mentor new neighbors who were unfamiliar with the community's rules and expectations. By sharing insights, explaining procedures, and offering advice on documentation and communication, they helped others navigate challenges more effectively. This role not only strengthened their understanding of the HOA, but also built goodwill and mutual respect among residents. It became clear that influence within the community was not only about formal authority, but also about trust, knowledge, and support. Through all these experiences, the main character maintained a sense of balance and perspective. The house, with its beauty and comfort, remained a sanctuary and a reminder of the inheritance's value. Challenges with the HOA were met with careful thought and strategy, transforming potential frustration into learning and growth. Each notice, each meeting, and each interaction provided insight into the dynamics of power, influence, and human behavior within the community. By the end of this period, the main character had developed a clear approach to life in the neighborhood. Awareness, preparation, documentation, and diplomacy became core strategies. The ability to observe patterns, anticipate potential issues, and act strategically allowed the main character to navigate challenges with confidence and composure. The community, while still demanding in its rules and oversight, was no longer intimidating. It was a landscape to be understood, managed, and, when necessary, challenged thoughtfully. Part 3 closes with the main character positioned as both a knowledgeable resident and a careful observer. Aware of the complexities of authority and human behavior, the early clashes with the HOA had revealed the importance of preparation, patience, and strategy. The journey from simple compliance to informed action was well underway, setting the stage for the challenges and victories that lay ahead. Each experience, each notice, and each interaction contributed to a growing sense of agency and empowerment, preparing the main character for the critical moments that would shape their future in the neighborhood. The challenges of the neighborhood continued to evolve, and by the fourth part of this journey, the main character was beginning to understand that the HOA's power extended far beyond rules and regulations. The organization had a subtle way of asserting control, shaping not only what residents could do with their property, but also how they interacted with one another. The main character realized that the earlier notices and minor disputes were just the beginning, a way to test resolve and gauge reactions. What lay ahead would require both strategy and courage. A new notice arrived one morning that seemed to escalate the situation. It concerned a minor addition to the backyard, something that enhanced the aesthetic of the property, but did not, in the main character's view, violate any clear guidelines. The HOA, however, claimed it was not approved, suggesting fines and a potential appearance before the board if the matter was not resolved. The main character felt a mix of frustration and determination. There was a clear pattern of overreach, and it was time to confront it methodically. Documentation from previous interactions, photographs, and notes on compliance became essential. Every step was carefully planned to avoid giving the HOA any unintentional leverage. The main character decided to approach the situation with both caution and assertiveness. They drafted a detailed letter to the board, outlining the compliance measures already taken, citing specific sections of the community guidelines, and questioning the rationale behind the notice. The tone was firm, yet respectful, reflecting both awareness and an understanding of the HOA's role. It was a careful balance, maintaining civility while asserting rights. This approach required patience, attention to detail, and confidence that knowledge could counteract arbitrary enforcement. As the days passed, the response from the HOA revealed more about their internal workings. Some board members were clearly uncomfortable with the challenge, while others attempted to assert authority through stern language and reminders of penalties. The main character observed these dynamics closely, recognizing that understanding individual personalities and motivations was as important as knowing the rules themselves. Strategic action required insight into both the written regulations and the human behavior behind them. During this period, the main character also began to engage more deeply with neighbors. Casual conversations evolved into discussions about past disputes, shared experiences, and tips for navigating the HOA's enforcement patterns. Some residents shared stories of fines that had been successfully challenged, while others explained how documentation, timing, and diplomacy could influence outcomes. These exchanges reinforced the importance of community knowledge and collective wisdom. The main character began to see that strength came not only from personal awareness, but also from alliances, built on trust and shared understanding. One afternoon, a neighbor confided a particularly troubling story. They had faced months of fines and warnings over a small landscaping project, despite following the rules as written. The board had been unyielding, and the resident had spent considerable time and resources fighting back. Listening to this, the main character realized that the HOA's power could feel overwhelming, and that careful, informed resistance was crucial. The importance of preparation, persistence, and strategic communication became clear. Knowledge alone was not enough. It had to be applied thoughtfully and consistently. The main character's approach began to take shape. Every notice was reviewed carefully, every interaction documented, and every communication drafted with attention to detail. Meetings with board members were approached as opportunities to present facts, clarify misunderstandings, and assert rights respectfully. The character learned to anticipate possible objections, prepare evidence, and frame arguments in a way that was both clear and persuasive. This methodical strategy reduced stress, minimized conflict, and began to shift the perception of the main character within the community. Meanwhile, the HOA attempted to apply subtle pressure through social channels. Comments at meetings, casual remarks during community events, and occasional public reminders of compliance expectations were designed to create unease. The main character, aware of these tactics, responded with calm composure. By maintaining a clear record of interactions, documenting every compliance step, and remaining polite yet firm, they neutralized attempts at intimidation. Each successful navigation of these challenges built confidence and demonstrated that careful strategy could counteract arbitrary authority. One particular incident highlighted the growing tension. During a scheduled meeting, a board member raised a question about a minor outdoor improvement, framing it as a potential violation. The room felt tense, with residents watching closely. The main character responded calmly, presenting documentation, referencing guidelines, and explaining compliance measures already taken. The board member's tone shifted, the public scrutiny highlighting the effectiveness of preparation and clear communication. It was a turning point. The main character realized that respect and firmness could coexist, and that authority could be met with informed engagement rather than confrontation. As weeks turned into months, the main character's influence within the community began to grow. Neighbors sought advice, shared observations, and occasionally attended meetings together to support one another. The house, once a symbol of inheritance, had become a center for understanding and thoughtful action. Residents began to recognize that standing up respectfully and knowledgeably was not only possible, but effective. The main character had transformed from a newcomer navigating confusion to a confident participant shaping their environment. Period also brought an increased focus on uncovering inconsistencies within the HOA. By examining meeting minutes, financial statements, and historical correspondence, the main character began to identify patterns of selective enforcement, procedural gaps, and areas where authority had been applied inconsistently. This knowledge was powerful. It provided a foundation for challenges, informed arguments, and opportunities to advocate for fairness. The main character approached this work methodically, gathering evidence, noting discrepancies, and preparing to use it strategically when needed. Community engagement continued to be a vital part of this process. The main character cultivated relationships based on trust, shared experiences, and support. Residents who had once felt powerless now had guidance, information, and a sense of empowerment. The main character's role extended beyond personal advocacy to helping others navigate the HOA effectively. It was a reminder that strength in a community often comes from collaboration, shared knowledge, and mutual support. The house itself remained a sanctuary throughout these challenges. The backyard provided a quiet space for reflection and planning. The rooms offered comfort and inspiration, and the aesthetic charm of the property reinforced a sense of pride. Each morning brought renewed energy to face potential disputes, and each evening allowed for reflection, documentation, and strategy refinement. The inheritance had become more than a house. It was a platform for learning, engagement, and careful assertion of rights. By this stage, the main character had developed a clear set of strategies for life in the neighborhood. Awareness, documentation, preparation, and communication were essential. Understanding human behavior, anticipating potential issues, and engaging with both authority and neighbors thoughtfully had become second nature. The community, while still demanding, was no longer intimidating. Each challenge was an opportunity to test strategy, build confidence, and assert fairness. Part 4 closes with the main character positioned as a knowledgeable, prepared, and confident member of the community. The earlier challenges had revealed the depth of the HOA's influence and the importance of strategy, preparation, and patience. The journey from initial inheritance to effective navigation of authority had progressed significantly, setting the stage for the final phase, confronting overreach directly, asserting rights, and achieving victory. Each step, each interaction. And each carefully considered action had prepared the main character for the challenges and triumphs that lay just ahead. By the time the main character entered the final stage of this journey, the neighborhood had transformed from a place of cautious curiosity to a battlefield of patience, strategy, and determination. The earlier months had taught important lessons about compliance, observation, and careful communication. Every notice from the HOA, every minor conflict, and every interaction had been a building block for understanding the system. Now, the main character was prepared to take decisive action. Not with aggression, but with clarity, preparation, and unwavering confidence. The latest notice from the HOA arrived on a crisp morning. This time it concerned a garden sculpture that had been in the backyard for weeks without issue. Suddenly, it was deemed non-compliant, with language suggesting a possible fine if removed immediately. Instead of reacting with frustration, the main character carefully reviewed all previous documentation, photos, and records of correspondence. The pattern of overreach was evident. Minor details were being amplified to assert authority, while similar instances in other properties had gone unnoticed. It was clear that the HOA's actions were not merely procedural, but selectively enforced. This insight formed the foundation for a response that was methodical and strategic. The main character drafted a detailed letter to the HOA, presenting the documented evidence of compliance, citing specific sections of the community guidelines, and politely questioning the rationale for the notice. The tone was respectful, firm, and unyielding in the facts presented. The letter was accompanied by photographs, measurements, and references to prior communications that demonstrated adherence to all regulations. It was a culmination of months of careful observation, documentation, and preparation. The approach was not confrontational, but authoritative in its clarity, showing that the main character understood the rules and would not be intimidated by arbitrary enforcement. Days passed without a response, heightening tension and anticipation. Neighbors, aware of the growing situation, quietly offered support and shared experiences from their own interactions with the HOA. The main character recognized that community support was a powerful asset, providing both information and moral reinforcement. It became evident that transparency, preparation, and patience could shift the balance of power. When the HOA finally replied, it was clear that the detailed documentation had an impact. The language was less threatening, and the letter acknowledged the points raised, providing a resolution that avoided fines and reinforced compliance. Victory, though quiet, had been achieved.